Hello and welcome to episode 62 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Ali Najafizadeh.
Hello, guys.
Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
And today our special guest is Leland Richardson from Airbnb. Welcome to the show, Leland.
How's it going?
It's going great. We've been looking forward to having you on, and we've been kind of going back and forth for a while, so it's a pleasure to finally kind of connect. And I know there's so much to talk about, especially with all of the open source stuff that you all are doing. And I've seen you speak at a few conferences, and there's just a lot to talk about. So I'm looking really forward to kind of get into this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on.
So I guess before we kind of dive into the topic, can you kind of go into how you personally got into programming in general? This is a very general question we normally kind of go over just to kind of get an idea, of each person coming on, like how you got into programming and how this programming like career of yours led you to Airbnb where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of talk about this with a number of people, but most of my life, I didn't actually think I was going to go into programming. For most of my life, I thought I was going to be a physicist. And so kind of through like middle school onward, most of my life was kind of spent thinking a lot about math and science. And I went to Rice University, got a degree in math and physics, and did some physics research there. And when I was in high school, programming sort of became, I learned kind of an easy way to make money. I was, working in a restaurant as a busboy, and kind of found this job at a machine shop where I started doing some machining, and then kind of got into some office-based work there, doing some programming, some really basic stuff. I think at the time it was like Visual Basic and Microsoft SQL and some stuff like that. And I never really thought of it as a career so much as at the time just kind of an easy way to make a little more money than I would doing bussing tables or something like that.
So where did you live at this time?
Oh yeah, so this was in St. Louis, Missouri, so kind of Midwest America.
Oh wow, okay, that's interesting. Coming from Mississippi, I totally relate, I guess. But anyway, keep on going.
Yeah. And so anyway, when I got into college, a sort of similar thing kind of happened where I wasn't necessarily looking at programming as a career choice, but again, it became a nice way to make money. I was sort of paying my way through school, and got a job at like a local sort of oil and gas company out there in Houston, and started writing some software for them, mainly sort of database kind of web services, sort of tailored towards that industry. And by the time I graduated, I kind of had this choice of whether or not I should kind of pursue my dreams of physics and become kind of go into academia, or I had someone who kind of had approached me talking about going into like kind of starting a startup, and being the technical co-founder there. And so I kind of had to be honest with myself and look at whether or not I thought programming was something I wanted to do as a career. And kind of when I was honest with myself, I realized that I actually had a lot more fun working on those things than I did with physics. And I kind of looked at it the same way, but it had some qualities that physics didn't have for me. There's kind of this ability to think abstractly and kind of just press a button and see how your theory kind of maps out in the real world. And that sort of bridge from abstract to concrete that programming provides, I think was like a really powerful feedback loop for me that just made me enjoy the work a lot more. So anyway, I kind of ended up starting this a startup, and worked on that for a few years. moved out to the Valley, and after a while that didn't quite work out, and I started looking for companies to join that I could really kind of get into, and I decided that I really wanted to be an individual contributor as opposed to founding another startup or something like that. I kind of really enjoyed the engineering work, and so kind of landed at a Airbnb, which I consider kind of a bigger company, though maybe by some standards it's not, but it seemed huge to me. And yeah, kind of moved there and really enjoy working on infrastructure over here.
That's awesome. So you didn't really go and get a classical computer science degree or anything like that. You kind of were self-taught, I guess.
Yeah, as far as programming goes, definitely kind of self-taught. I'm pretty avid online courseware person. I take a lot of courses just sort of at my own pace online. I did so through college and afterwards, and so definitely have some computer science knowledge, just nothing formal.
So that's so interesting that someone, that has gotten, become pretty successful working at a company like Airbnb, just people listening out there, like if you are self-taught, a lot of big companies are more interested in, the person and their ability to learn, I guess, than, their degrees and things like that. I personally am self-taught as well, and I feel like it hasn't really been a barrier to entry. Though, of course, if I could go back in time, I would have loved to have gotten my degree. But,
Yeah, I was also self-taught, and I was actually supposed to start law school a month before I got my first programming job. My buddy was like, "Hey, like you're probably as good, if not better, than some of the people that I'm working with." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't have a degree though." He's like, "Well, honestly, what's the worst that can happen? You don't get the job, And I was like, "Yeah, good point." I applied, got the job, and 2 weeks before I'm supposed to start, I'm like, sorry, law school, like I got to pull out. Like I actually got a job instead, and that sort of kickstarted my programming career.
So, how did your parents feel about that? Or were they the type that are kind of not really that involved anyway?
They were like, my parents are, foreign, so I'm first generation here. They grew up in like a different sort of environment, right, where like the education was like everything, so, but they supported me. They were just like, "Are you sure you're making the right decision? Like you don't have a computer science degree, like how far are you really going to go in your career?" But they like supported me. They were just like nervous, is this the right choice for you? Like you were supposed to be a lawyer and now you're not, so, but it worked out. Like at this, they're obviously very proud of, what I've done so far. So I'm happy to say that it was a positive experience.
Very cool. Very cool. So, Leland, you mentioned online courses and things like that. How do you continue your education? Do you still take those online courses, or do you more learn from firsthand experience at your company, or just kind of curious at that level, how do you continue learning?
Yeah, I haven't done an online course in a little while. I feel like every time I end up on Audacity or MIT OpenCourseWare or any of those kind of online courseware sites, I feel like it ends up being like a huge rabbit hole. I see all the things that are available, but I haven't. I've sort of blocked that from my browser history maybe for a little while and haven't made it on there. I think a lot of where I sort of learn and progress is definitely just with my day-to-day work at Airbnb, but it's definitely getting very, very narrow and very focused. So a lot of the things I learn, now are really applied to specific technologies and specific problems, which is very good because you get kind of a deep sense of a particular problem. But I think that what gets interesting is when when you kind of feel like you've taken that sort of niche of the industry, and you've kind of learned what you want to learn, and you want to kind of move on to something else. And some areas where I've kind of found myself doing that a little bit are, I mean, originally I was very much a web development focused engineer, and it kind of became an expert, in that area, and have since kind of migrated into this native world, and I'm finding myself kind of diving deeper and deeper into the iOS and Android platforms, and a lot of that is learning from the people around me, solving hard, difficult problems when they come up, and also just doing some reading and leveraging the internet is really sort of the greatest resource I can think of. But yeah.
Do you like the mobile space so far? Do you like it more than the web? What are your thoughts on it?
It's interesting. I think there are some similarities and some differences. I sort of fell in love with the web space, I think, in large part due to the kind of vibrant open source community that at least the JavaScript community tends to have, which for me, I was always drawn to. I can't really think of another industry that has such a community around sharing and really just putting things out there for free, and like having just people at different companies just openly collaborate with one another. I think that's, I'm sure there are examples, but that's, to me, is just something pretty unique to this industry. And the kind of web development community, it seems like that's sort of more at its core than with like iOS or Android. Probably Android is probably closer to the web in that regard, but iOS seems to be a bit further away.
So let's talk about React Native. How was React Native introduced into Airbnb, and when was that done, and what were the circumstances, I guess, behind it, and kind of to get this conversation started?
So when I joined Airbnb, React Native wasn't used at all, and I was kind of an open proponent of it. I know that Spike and Spike is someone I work with at Airbnb, and I remember we actually talked about it on the sell call for me joining Airbnb. But he told me, he said, we don't use it, but you should come over to Airbnb and start that effort. So it's basically what I did. So I worked on our web infrastructure team on a lot of different stuff. I didn't work on React Native right away, but about 6 months after I joined, it had sort of reached a point where the conversation was healthy enough that I could start working on that type of a project, sort of like an exploratory kind of capacity. I had brought it up as something that we should try out, and so we started kind of meeting with different stakeholders, some engineers, some managers, and started talking about what the main motivations were for trying it, how we could try it in sort of an unobtrusive way, and sort of maintain as little kind of risk as possible, and sort of like the kind of the big thing in my mind originally was like, what does a successful kind of project look like? Like at what point, like what metrics would we use to determine if React Native was something we wanted to continue using? And so we had kind of talked all around this, and so then we decided that Spike and myself would start working on a small feature in the Airbnb app that was kind of, it was low risk. So there wasn't, we weren't tying ourselves to any deadline. If something kind of bad happened, it wouldn't be, tanking some top line business metric or anything like that. And that it was like kind of a good candidate for a typical flow that we might think we would want to build in React Native later on. And so we started working on this, and the kind of the main premise was that Spike and I would work on this, and along the way we would find a lot of problems that like a lot of hurdles that we had to kind of get over, and that was sort of the point, was to identify what those hurdles were and to build a good foundation around that without a ton of time pressure, so that a solid foundation was kind of laid for people in the future. So this first feature might take 5 to 10 times as long to make as we would want it to take in the future, but that was because we were kind of building all of these things for the first time. And so after a couple of months, we kind of got that feature to completion, and we launched it in the production app, and put up an experiment against the native implementation, and wanted that to be at least neutral. And so over time we got to that point, and kind of along the way there was a lot of education for other engineers, and kind of demystifying what React Native was and what it meant if we started using it, and what that might look like, and stuff like that.
So what were some of the main challenges that you kind of ran into when you all were bringing this into, I guess, an existing app? I'm sure that you all were bringing this into, or was it a brand new app? And also, how did you kind of overcome those things? Because at the time, I have to say, there probably wasn't a lot of like groundwork laid in this area. I'm sure you guys had to kind of innovate or figure things out on your own, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some other people doing similar things, but it was definitely not the sort of happy path. Let's see. I mean, some problems that I think we and most other companies sort of had to figure out. We had to like build something that integrated with our logging system. We had to build something that integrated with our experimentation framework that we've built to do A/B testing. We had to integrate with our internationalization APIs and generating new translations and things like that. We sort of have like a feature flag system. We had to build something integrating with that. Let's see. There's like kind of a number of sort of small state management things that we had to build. We had to integrate with some things to like maintain whether like what the logged in user, who the logged in user was, what their sort of favorited listings were, and kind of like what current booked listings they have and upcoming trips and some stuff like that. We wanted to like make sure that we were properly sharing network caches and things like that. So we rely heavily on like HTTP level caching, and wanted to make sure that the network requests were kind of all feeding through the same pipeline, with the same authentication and headers and all that stuff. We wanted to share image caches. So we needed to make sure that if you had seen a listing image somewhere else in the app, that if you saw it in a React Native screen, that it wouldn't result in a request. And then kind of on top of all that stuff, which is sort of just this like glue, we had to build a component library in React Native that matched the component libraries that we had in iOS and Android. And then one of the biggest kind of source of problems that we had initially was with navigation and making that feel seamless. And so we kind of rethought the way we were doing navigation to and from native and React Native screens, and out of that was born the native navigation library that we launched recently.
I would love to talk about that native navigation library because it just seems like a really cool way to go about it, actually using the real native underlying native code as opposed to JavaScript animations. But before we get to that, what has been the reception as far as within the company? And so you're continuing using React Native. I'm guessing it's been a net positive as far as something is it bringing about cost savings, or are you iterating quicker, or what's been the general consensus within the company as far as continuing to use it or not use it?
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty complicated question, and the answer probably depends on who you ask. But overall, it's pretty hard to measure what kind of benefits you get in terms of developer productivity and things like that. It's sort of kind of a subjective, guttural feel a lot of the time. The main metric that we're kind of using, which I'm not sure I can even call it a metric, but I think is a pretty solid way of doing it, is just letting engineers choose for themselves. And if people have a good experience using React Native, they'll recommend to use it again for the next thing that they build or whatever. And so the way I look at my job is really about just kind of making the experience for a developer at Airbnb building a feature with React Native as good as possible. And I don't pretend for a second that we have a perfect track record there. It's been a long process, and there's a lot of hurdles and problems that we have to overcome, and we don't have a ton of people working on this infrastructure. And so we have a mixture of people. We've got people that have used React Native and loved it. We've got some people that have used React Native and gotten a bad taste in their mouths for various reasons, and maybe some people that are just kind of lukewarm on it. But for each of those experiences, we've kind of come away with a learning. So the people that had bad experiences, we want to find out why, and try and solve the problems they ran into in a better way, or maintain a better SLA with those engineers. And the people that did have a good experience, we want to try and see if why that was, if their feature that they chose was kind of along a particular happy path or something like that, and then learn from that as well. So then maybe recommend other teams, build those same types of features, or see if we notice any patterns and stuff like that.
Before we got too far along, Leland, I just wanted to quickly ask, and maybe you sort of answered this, but if you could start over, what would you do a little differently with React Native, knowing what you know now? Whether that's, I guess it's a two-part question. You on your own, and then maybe you and your involvement at Airbnb.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think earlier on, I spent too much time thinking about what people would need, and trying to build all of the things that people would need before we actually needed them. And I think we probably should have just kind of built things as we needed them a little bit more. That's a double-edged sword, though, because I think there were times where we were building things, as we needed them, obviously, and then for the people, for the product engineers, that's not a great experience either. But I think that we spent some time building things that we didn't actually need that much. It was a little early to start building those things, and then later when we did end up needing them, they ended up not even really completely solving things the way that we needed. So there's some blind spots there. I think kind of one maybe big mistake that we made. Well, I don't want to call it a mistake, but I think one thing that looking back was really difficult was we just ended up really growing our React Native kind of user base here at Airbnb really, really fast, and it was hard to keep up with it. And that just created a lot of technical debt, but also like a lot of emotional debt. There's a lot of people that maybe were using React Native and now maybe associate it with like a platform that like wasn't quite there yet, because we were constantly 3 weeks behind where we needed to be to get engineers using it the way they needed to. But that's, sort of how things go, I think, sometimes.
Did you ever feel like people were super against it because they were, native iOS or Android developers, and they almost felt like you were kind of, maybe not you personally, but, React Native was sort of like, messing with their turf?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like some resistance, but I'm not sure I completely, like, I don't think it's completely unfounded, right? I think most people just want to make sure that we deliver a good product to our users. And so, I think that there's a lot of people that maybe jump to conclusions earlier on and maybe don't fully understand what's going on. But, I think a lot of people just, question the value that it adds at the end of the day, and that, we don't want, they see it as something that could potentially reduce the quality of the app or something like that. And, most of my day is spent trying to make sure that isn't the result, right? That the result is, a quality bar at the same level or greater even, while using this new technology. And that's not quite an easy task, with React Native. I think there are a lot of traps that you can fall into that kind of on the surface will really, hinder performance or quality of the app. And so you have to make sure to watch that.
Do you think in the future, Airbnb can completely replace the native part, and then they basically ship the Airbnb completely in React Native? Or there are some part of the app that it still needs to be in native? And if so, can you tell us which part so we can know?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people ask this. My answers maybe evolve slightly over time, but I think to answer this, you really have to ask yourself what it means to have an app that's completely React Native. I think there could be a world where the entire app was sort of controlled from React Native, like, maybe the sort of top level logic and sort of sources of truth were held in kind of a JavaScript land. But even then, I think that's like super far off. But I think that there will, like, React Native works because you're just using the React paradigm to control views and components that are native. And for different problems, you may have to raise the level at which that like abstraction happens. And there are definitely features that we may want to do in the Airbnb app that would, like, using or building them kind of from scratch in JavaScript would just be like the wrong choice, just because you can only do so much with a single thread, and there's just a lot of logic that you would need to do to implement certain features that would have to happen on the native side. And like I think that's fine, right? And that's sort of where the power of React Native comes in. And so there might be, if we did live in a world where the whole app was kind of controlled at the top level from JavaScript, there would definitely have to be some features that were really complex kind of systems, like UI systems that were just only controlled in a small level from JavaScript, leveraging like the kind of things that React Native provides you. But that I don't think that like the whole app's going to be kind of React Native without any significant kind of native components, and that's fine.
So I guess I have some questions about some of the open source stuff that you all have done. I know the first really big library, at least that I'm aware of, that was put out and maintained was the maps. Now, I know that Airbnb, of course, the app and the whole idea and the company is centered around maps. When you go to the website, you have that really nice UI with the maps, and on the mobile app, you're also able to interact with the map. Was that something that I guess you all built internally, and it was like out of necessity that you needed that, and then you wanted to kind of release it into the public? And I'm kind of curious, what all went into that, and if that project is going good, and kind of what the future plans are for that, because I know a lot of people use that.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of funny that library in particular actually went through almost the opposite sort of life cycle. React Native Maps was built by me. I think it was over New Year's, not this last New Year's, but the New Year's prior, when I was in Costa Rica. And Airbnb wasn't using React Native at the time. That was before we started working on React Native. What actually had happened was there was a hackathon at Airbnb where I built a React Native app, and wanted to have part of it use maps, and realized that the built-in map view components that React Native provided were pretty lacking. And I hadn't ever built maybe I had built something really small, but I hadn't built a native React Native component. And this seemed like a really good sort of learning opportunity. It was kind of seems like a challenge, and I had kind of in my head an idea for how the React API would look. I had some experience building map components in React. I built the map components that Airbnb uses on the web. And so I wanted to kind of match that interface, which basically kind of TLDR has, uses React children components of the map component to create features on the map. Like markers and shapes and things like that. And so I wanted the React Native API to be the same way. And I didn't know how you could do that with native React Native components. And so it was like kind of a fun challenge that I wanted to try out. And so I got it working, and I sort of put it up in a repo. I didn't even publish it on NPM. Originally, I was just sharing it with some people at Facebook, saying, hey, we should make the one in core like this. And like people actually started downloading the repo and like copying the source themselves, and started filing issues and bug reports and stuff like this, and saying, hey, we should publish this. So I did, but we weren't using it. I wasn't using it in any production app or anything like that. And so it ended up being really difficult to maintain because of that. And it's a very complicated library, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And the corresponding kind of native libraries for Google Maps and MapKit and Mapbox and stuff are monolith libraries that have huge memory implications, and a lot of subtlety to how they're implemented and all this stuff. And so there was, I initially kind of viewed it as like a proof of concept, but something that still needed quite a bit of polish. And so it became really, really difficult to maintain. I ended up, finding some other people that were using it in production apps and kind of asking for some help in terms of maintaining it. And then it was only quite a bit later that we actually had a React Native flow that was using a map. And I didn't want to transfer the library to Airbnb until we started actually relying on it in production. And so that only happened, maybe, I don't remember exactly when it was. It was maybe July or August or something. And so that was the point that we transferred it to Airbnb. And it's still, to be quite honest, it's still pretty hairy around the edges. It's a difficult library, and I think even today we're getting quite a few crashes that kind of come from subtle bugs around that library. So hopefully we'll kind of get it to a much saner place than it is now, but definitely looking for some people to help out there, because there are a lot of other people that are using it in production, and we'd be very, very open to some help with contributions.
Yeah, that's a super interesting story to hear that. I'm kind of curious though, that now that you kind of went into all that, do you feel like that may be a limitation for React Native as far as building out a lot of these abstractions on top of iOS and Android when you start getting into more complicated stuff like maps, for instance? Is that going to be something that kind of holds the framework back in the future, or do you feel like that with more and more people using it, more people contributing, that we're kind of overcoming some of these problems? But it just seems like there's always going to be, of course, when you build another layer of abstraction, it's going to be so hard to keep up with the parity there. Whenever, for instance, they come out with a new version of the underlying API.
I think it's definitely harder. There's a layer of abstraction that's maybe hindering you a bit, but I don't think that it's unachievable. I mean, I think that for maps, React ends up being a really good way to interact with maps. We've had a lot of luck on the web, with React-based abstractions on top of maps. And so in that sense, I think that there's even some value over the top that React Native could provide. I think it really needs some elbow grease. I think that there's it's a complex system, and we're using the React abstraction in addition to the React Native abstraction in terms of native components and in sort of weird ways to accomplish the goal. And there can be some subtle bugs that crop up from that, but I think with some experienced native engineers and some experienced JavaScript engineers kind of working together, I think that you can get a pretty nice experience at the end of the day. Just take some work.
Where do you see the future of React Native going and Airbnb?
Well, I hope that we continue to adopt it and build more and more of the app with it, especially for the features that it makes a lot of sense with. I think that once the sort of foundation and the base level infrastructure for React Native at Airbnb matures, that we will see pretty drastic productivity gains, and also just some kind of, I don't know, I would say organizational changes around how we think about platforms and verticals and things like that. I think I've always, one of the things that's always kind of been pointed to as something that React Native could improve is the ability to have kind of a single engineer understand a problem really well. And so if you have an engineer building a certain feature, they can start to understand, how that feature impacts the business and what sort of logic needs to go into that, and how, this internal API works, and building that feature and like really just doing it once and making that one feature as good as it can be, rather than having, 3 or 4 different people building the exact same thing with almost no communication with one another. And so you're kind of learning the same, you have different people that are running into the same problems and doing the same things multiple times. And I think React Native can help eliminate a lot of that. I also think that the more that we build with it, I think long term we'll be able to have a much higher velocity for development. One of the technologies that we're really hoping to use as time goes on is code push, and being able to continuously deploy changes and iterate on products at a much higher rate than we can right now. Right now we have any sort of feature improvement or bug fix or feature flag addition or anything that we do, you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks before that actually hits real users. Whereas on the web right now, we have a feedback loop of like less than an hour. So it's pretty dramatic difference there. And I think if we started realizing that as an organization, that could have a huge impact on our bottom line. The other thing, with React Native, you end up sharing quite a bit of code between iOS and Android. And I could see that moving into iOS, Android, and the web potentially in the future. And then there's even been some experimentation that we've been doing with taking our React native code base and including things like our component library and rendering the result of that not to a device or a browser, but actually to Sketch to render designs for our designers. And we're kind of exploring different ways to leverage that, and that could actually impact, I think, pretty significantly the design process and how designers interact with engineers and engineers with designers, and how we're able to leverage the sort of concepts of React, which is sort of an abstraction over whatever platform you're targeting, and start to maybe see that reap benefits in ways more than just building the actual thing, but actually with consistency across design and engineering organizations at Airbnb. And so there are just, those are kind of like the ways that like I kind of see on the horizon here. But I think long term, there's tremendous value to thinking about your application and your UI with a single paradigm across all platforms, and what kind of value that consistency might bring you.
Okay, so that's super interesting, because one of my favorite talks of all time was James Ide and ReactConf 2016. He gave a talk called Team X Technology, and he kind of dove into that entire idea for about 25 minutes. And I think what he was kind of talking about was very similar to what you were saying. And it was basically the idea of a cross-stack developer as opposed to a developer that is only limited to one platform, but instead they're kind of organized by features. So this feature gets given and managed by this developer, and he works on it, and he iterates, and he bug fixes. And by the end of it, you kind of, like you said, you understand the business problems, you understand everything that's going on there, and you're implementing it one way, but it goes into all these other platforms. So I guess one of my questions is, and you kind of went over this a few times already, but what is your vision for where React and React Native and all that stuff is headed as far as the targeting of all of these other platforms? Do you believe that we're kind of on the right track with React Native, and then we're plugging in React Native Web, and then we're plugging in, React Native Windows, and then we have these other kind of pluggable things? Or do you think that something like React XP, which was put up by Windows recently, is maybe like a single plugin with a slightly different API? Or do you believe it's maybe something completely different, or just kind of your general view on that whole idea?
That's a really great question, and one I think about quite a bit. So I'm arguably a little bit biased. I have a library that I worked on and am working on called React Primitives, which attempts to basically answer exactly this question. And I'll kind of give my sort of feel on the topic. I think that React XP is like reasonably close to where we want to go. I have kind of a slightly more opinionated view of what it should look like. And I started formulating these ideas. Big shout out to Nicholas Gallagher from Twitter, who wrote React Native Web. The kind of ideas that he started working on is sort of really what kind of made me start thinking about this. But when I built the component library of in React Native at Airbnb, one of the things I noticed was I implemented almost the entire library. I would say, maybe 95% of it, with all of about 6 top level APIs from React Native. And when I kind of finished the first sort of version of the library, I reflected on this fact, and it made me realize that there are sort of these primitive interfaces that React Native provides, that from which you can build almost anything. Not everything, but a good chunk of things. And I guess to lay it out there, those interfaces are, for React Native, is view, text, and image, kind of as the 3 sort of core primitive components. There's a touchable interface, which is something I kind of rejiggered from the touchable opacity and touchable highlight that React Native provided out of the gate. The style sheet API, which is pretty crucial. You can't really have a unified set of components without a unified sort of understanding of how those components lay out. And so really I say the style sheet API, but a big piece of that is the fact that it's the Flexbox implementation underneath. And so, really a layout algorithm is kind of a necessary piece of this universal platform. And then another sort of really important piece I found was the animated API, which didn't ship, I think, in React Native until like 0.8 or something, but that feels like an eternity ago. But that was the animated API, I think, is a really, really well designed declarative animation framework that I think really does a good job of allowing React and animations to sort of become one, in a way that could be abstracted across multiple platforms, which I think is important. And then one final API, which I think is kind of just an afterthought, but is the platform API, which in React Native is a way to allow you to toggle between different code paths for different platforms. And so I started thinking around this idea that those 6 APIs could become what I called the primitives of React, and so those would be React primitives. And so React Native kind of already provides most of those things, minus touchable. And like I guess what I'm kind of asserting is that they did those APIs right. Those are kind of the good parts of React Native that I think really stuck out, and most of the other stuff I think is kind of just really dependent on what you're trying to do and what platform you're on and things like that. But these were really, I think, brilliant interfaces to create cross-platform UI. And so what Nicholas did originally, and what I sort of copied, was kind of building that API into the web and building identically behaving interfaces on top of browser APIs and React DOM. And once you sort of get that, the result is like pretty staggering. We've been able to convert like entire React Native flows, like entire chunks of code that like are in production, and actually just render them to the browser as like a web app, which is like pretty crazy once you like see it for the first time. And then doing sort of the same thing with Sketch was, I think, kind of another big like moment where I was like, whoa, like this actually just works. And so I think in terms of building kind of cross-platform UI, I think there is one other thing that React Native provided that is sort of critical here, which is the idea of platform extensions, in terms of file names. And so you're able to create, a certain component, let's say a React component, button or something. And let's say that you want to build like a really platform optimized button, and you're leveraging some features that only that platform has. And so what you can do is you can say, let's say that that's on the Android platform. You can have a button.android.js, and you'll sort of go down that code path for Android, and then you'll use the normal button.js for everything else. And this ends up being a really powerful tool where we can now take an entire dependency graph of a code base, and we can start to split it by platform for little pieces of it, and then bring it back together. And that ends up being a really good way to share code when you want to share code, and not share code when you don't want to, and be able to kind of optimally leverage code sharing in whatever way you want. And so I think Facebook realized early on that was a critical piece of React Native, the ability to do this. And so a lot of the kind of underlying designs of React Native are built around this ability to build cross-platform UIs. But I think it goes much, much beyond iOS and Android. And so I think that if the community kind of standardizes on this sort of like tooling around this platform extension idea, I think that's a big piece of it. And then the other piece, I think, is that we need some base level set of components, i.e. the React primitives, that people can start to use to build anything. And that like, it's important to understand that this doesn't mean that everything has to be built from these primitives. It doesn't mean that I need to build an example that I use is the checkbox component. On the web, if we want to build a checkbox, we probably want to use a standard web input with type checkbox. And that's for all sorts of reasons, because there's all sorts of accessibility concerns. There's just better behavior baked into the browser. Like, we definitely want to leverage those platform built-ins. But what's interesting is that, like, you don't actually necessarily need to do that on iOS or Android, right? Maybe we want to build a checkbox component, and it looks a certain way, and we just build one out of touchable, view, animated, those types of things. And so we build a checkbox that implements a certain interface, and we have a checkbox component. On the web, we could implement this same checkbox with the primitives or with input type checkbox. And this is a perfect usage of the .web.js platform extension. You're able to just have that optimized version for that platform. But if you also build a version that is built just out of primitives, then you get this interesting property where now you have that component for free on any platform that also implements the primitives. And so if you kind of always follow this rule where you implement any component you want to implement, you try to build out of other components that also follow this rule or the primitives, then your component will by default work in any platform that implements the primitives. But so you just do that first. And if you want to have a platform specific implementation for that component, you do that second. And you do that in one of these .foo.js files that for this platform that you're implementing. And if we started shipping like real libraries following this pattern, we could have an entire ecosystem that is built and works just as well as it does today, but has this interesting property where as soon as someone builds the primitives in a new language, in a new platform, like say, VR or TV or Windows or whatever platform they want, maybe it's something that doesn't exist yet, that all of a sudden all of your code works in that platform. There may be things that aren't super optimized, like maybe they didn't build that really good custom checkbox component, but they will have something that looks correct and mostly works because it's built from the primitives. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity that we as like a community sort of have, where we're leveraging the kind of fact that React isn't platform specific. It doesn't rely on any implementation details of any platform. It's simply a way of generating UI descriptions and composing them really conveniently to build more and more powerful things on top of each other. And so then the actual UI implementation of those things, we can kind of narrow down to a pretty specific subset that almost anyone could implement. And all of a sudden, all of that kind of application logic that doesn't rely on a specific platform, but would normally be tied to it for certain reasons, is now completely cross-platform, and we could start leveraging that in really, really powerful ways that I think we're only now just starting to broach the surface.
So I think this is some of the most exciting stuff going on with React and React Native right now. I could talk about this for a long time and for hours. It's just so cool. So if someone wants to kind of check this out, I guess they could go ahead and go to your repo, React Primitives. It's on your personal repo.
Yeah, if you want to go check out the React Primitives repo, I think there's a lot of other people that are really thinking about this stuff. I'm not necessarily saying that my library is the best library or anything, but I think in terms of the sort of underlying idea about how to, as a community, move towards a cross-platform world, I think that this is a good path. And I think Nicholas at Twitter is doing a lot of great work in this area. Microsoft with React XP is definitely kind of starting to understand this space and doing a lot of good work over there. And so there's just a lot of good stuff going on.
So I feel like we could have like an entire episode for each of the libraries that Airbnb has open source for React Native, because you have Lottie, you have the new navigation library, you have the maps, and I'm sure a few other things. I guess, can you kind of talk about? We're going to kind of go over maybe a couple more things because we're kind of running on time. But can you kind of talk about the sketch thing that you guys have been working on? I know I'd seen some discussion on Twitter, and you kind of talked about that. Is that something that's going to be released to the public?
Yeah, we're really close. We've been working on trying to kind of polish that library up and make it something that people can easily consume without trying to fall down some rabbit hole. And then also just putting on some of the polish for the library. There were some things that weren't 100% correct when we built it for the first time, and so we're getting really close to the stage where we can open source that. And I think for that project in particular, it's kind of this it's this thing where we know it's going to sort of play a big part in our process, but we're not exactly sure how yet. We're still very early on, kind of experimenting with what it means to be able to generate these things from code that potentially designers might use and interact with, and how we can affect our process and some of the pain points that we're having around our design process with such a technology. And that's not entirely clear yet. We have some ideas that we're working on, but we're also just really interested in what other people come up with. We've received a lot of interest from other companies facing similar design problems to ourselves that are really interested in this project. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it, a year from now.
So is it going to be like an app like that is a plugin for Sketch, or is it going to be an existing freestanding application? And is it going to be more of a design and then export code type of thing?
So to be clear, we're not exporting code. So this is like a code to Sketch framework. It's not a Sketch to code framework.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it turns out that is actually potentially more valuable to us than the other way around. But a lot of people want the opposite, which is a whole nother problem altogether. But yeah, it's going to work as kind of a Sketch plugin. We're not building like some new design application and like changing our business or anything like that. We're designers at Airbnb use Sketch, and we're not changing that.
Okay, that makes sense.
My question about the navigation was, I'm always curious about the custom animation, because usually I found it to be extremely difficult. I haven't tried the Airbnb library, but with the current X navigation and a lot of other navigator libraries, the custom animation is kind of like hard to implement, or you just have to dive into the code and then try to find the section that needs to be changed. So is there something that kind of available in the native navigation that I can leverage and then implement a custom animations on top of it? Have you thought about it? do you think it's kind of like an easy task to do, or it needs to be fully understand from the person who actually going to implement it?
Yeah, so the answer may be maybe what you want to hear, maybe not what you want to hear. So native navigation uses kind of the built-in navigation components, and because of that, you're able to kind of customize the native transitions in the same way that you would if you weren't using React Native. You're able to so anything that you would be already doing in a native app, if you happen to be integrating with the native app and already have these sort of custom transitions defined, you would be able to leverage those as well. And that's maybe slightly easier said than done. I think we're still trying to understand the best kind of extension points for us to provide that make it really easy to do these things, but also provide really good default behavior and things like that. And that's not all figured out yet. There were a couple of things that we ended up building into the library that didn't necessarily need to be built in, but we were using, so we did. One of them is like the shared element transitions. And I think that you could go a bit further with those types of transitions than we have already, but there's kind of some base level support built in there. And then we run into some platform differences too. So on iOS, it turns out to be like pretty easy to just configure something so that it uses like some built-in custom transition coordinator for iOS, and then there you can like literally do anything you want. On Android, it's not so flexible, and so there isn't really a way to just do that entirely in Android, at least not like without building your own sort of animation framework for it. And so we're still kind of exploring how to expose things, especially cross-platform things. But I don't know if that sort of answers your question or not.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like I have to actually jump into it. But recently, I'm actually working with the designer at work, and then there are some sort of like animation he wants to add into the app. And as far as I see, or I found, it's kind of like it has to be done in native side if I want to actually implement it. So what I did at the end is I start rebuilding everything into. Unfortunately, I have to build something again from the scratch. So it's called Scene Router. So I basically create something similar to the navigations, but what I'm actually doing is I fully customize the animation. It's not production ready yet. I'm just basically probably by end of the month probably should be ready, but working on the kind of like you plug type of animations that you want between the two scenes, and then it figure out to do the animation between those. So the hardest part, as you said, is just figure out the right API. So that's the things that I'm struggling. And I've been looking into a lot of other projects, but unfortunately, I haven't found a really good one until this. So I will definitely jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to open up an issue or something and kind of explain the animation you're looking for. I can't promise that we'll be able to provide some way to do it, but I'm always interested in understanding more people's use cases so that we can, try and evolve our APIs to solve real world problems.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So the last thing I want to cover is native navigation. I know that when I was at React Conf and a few months ago, and I didn't actually get a chance to meet you there, but I did see that you guys released native navigation, and it looks super interesting. I really like the fact that it uses native navigation under the hood. It's like using native components and native transitions. Can you kind of talk about like who would be a good use case for someone listening, why they should choose a native navigation, or if a certain use case would be better for React navigation or a certain other navigator, and kind of the benefits that they would get out of it, and also kind of why Airbnb uses that internally and why you guys built that.
So I think kind of the original reason that we went down that path was the constraint that we had, which was in my React Conf presentation, sort of what I called the brownfield constraints, which is when you have an app that you're slowly integrating React Native into. And so in order to do that effectively, you want to be able to do it like one screen at a time. And you might have entire flows that your new React Native flow needs to interact with. And so you need to go from a React Native screen to a native screen and back into React Native and kind of go back and forth. And you need to be able to do all of that without it being like really obvious to the user that like some huge weird context transition just took place. And so your React Native screens need to feel like other screens, and they need to enter into the viewable window in the same way as other screens. And in this case, there's often like maybe a navigation bar that's persisted across the screens. Maybe there's a tab bar that you need to interact with. There's a lot of those sort of little details, and that doesn't even kind of broach the fact that like even if you could do that in React Native, then you want them to sort of look pixel identical, or else there'll kind of be this weird sort of uncanny valley where you're like, this sort of looks like the last screen I was on. The navigation bar looks pretty similar, but maybe slightly different. Maybe these icons are a different size, or like whatever it is. And once you have that slight difference, you start to sort of lose the user's trust. And so you need to make sure that that your app feels like one sort of consistent product. And that was like really important for us. That was one of the first things. The other thing was just that it feels like navigation isn't super simple. And so it's like a pretty kind of foundational piece of a platform. And so if you implement it kind of on your own, then you end up having slight inconsistencies around what the platform is doing. And there's like a lot of implications there that aren't always super obvious. Like maybe you rolled your own navigation, but you found out that like it actually hinders accessibility like completely for screen readers or something like that. And there's a lot of that sort of stuff that you're getting by using the platform components that maybe aren't obvious right on the surface. And then also navigation ends up being kind of critical from a performance standpoint. When you're navigating between screens, it's a moment where you're actually every single time you're rendering an entire new screen. And so that takes some effort for React, right? You're rendering a new screen, and so you're spending all this time on the JavaScript thread going and rendering new stuff. And so if you're doing that on the JavaScript thread, then there's the JavaScript thread at that moment is pretty starved, and it's hard to have it do maybe more complex animations for the actual screen transition. And the new kind of offloaded native driver for the animated library definitely helps in this regard a lot. But by using the native navigation components, you're able to kind of let let the JavaScript thread focus on rendering the new screen that it needs to, and not worry about whether or not that animation transition is going to be smooth during that time. So I don't know. Those are a couple of sort of real reasons why we kind of decided to go this route. There are definitely kind of others that crop up, but the main focus was kind of around having this hybrid React Native app where you have native and React Native, and they really need to play nice with each other.
So if someone was kind of looking for a navigator or a navigation library for React Native, and they kind of really cared about their transitions, and they really like that was just a major part for them, this might be like probably a good way to go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like, I don't want to say that it's going to solve every problem. I think that, as Ali mentioned earlier, there's a lot of times there's really custom needs, and it's still unclear like what ability to customize we're going to be able to provide people. Hopefully good points of customization, but you can build a lot of things with React, and if you are building something super custom that like doesn't even resemble the platform anymore, then at that point you maybe the native navigation library is almost working against you because it is built on those platforms.
This has been like a longer than usual recording, but I feel like it's been one of the best episodes we've ever had because, like, hearing from a company like Airbnb and all the open source stuff you've done, and like I just feel like a lot of the topics we covered have been super valuable, and I really appreciate your time. I know you have to be super busy, and your time is probably very valuable. So, thank you for coming on with us.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a fun conversation.
So I guess we'll go ahead and jump to the picks. Ali, do you have any picks?
I do, actually. I have two picks. The first one is, I think it never actually mentioned, but it's about a new open source project. It's called Mastodon. I don't know. Have you heard about it? It's kind of like a Twitter on a open source Twitter that it doesn't actually belong to an organization. And a lot of people are actually tweeting about, please sign in, and then you can communicate with me through the Mastodon. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but I'll put the link. And the other one was, I was browsing the YouTube, and I found a 3 minutes YouTube video, which makes it really interesting of the 4 steps to getting an idea. And to me, it was kind of like interesting that why when I actually going to the vacation, suddenly I found like an idea is basically coming to my mind. That guy was basically describing it. So I highly recommend, if you have 3 minutes, just watch it. It's pretty interesting.
Peter, do you have any picks?
My pick for this episode is WebDSP. It's basically like a video editor, like built directly into the browser using WebAssembly. Some of the effects are just like insane. It's a really cool proof of concept. I think it's Chrome and Firefox only right now, but definitely check it out for some like really cutting edge stuff. You could like pass in a video or like use your like webcam, for example, and like add like a sunset or like a noise filter or like really mangle the video feed, stuff that you were only capable of doing, in Premiere Pro, for example, like directly in the browser. It's really cool.
Awesome. Leland, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share. I've been developing some courseware for React Native class that I'm teaching, and ended up using a service called graph.cool, which builds. It's sort of like Firebase, but for GraphQL, and so you're able to in seconds start building your own GraphQL schema, and you get a fully functional GraphQL endpoint basically for free, and you can kind of manage your your data there. And this is really cool platform. I've been really impressed with just how polished the site is. The documentation is really good, and it's worked like pretty flawlessly so far. So just want to give them a shout out.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been hearing about that. I've been wanting to check it out. We'll have to do that.
All I want to say is everybody's been talking about GraphCool lately. I was like, I happen to be Leland. I think you were on it. Maybe you were, but some like just tweet storm about using it with some people from Exponent or Expo now. I haven't tried it since, but I kind of want to now because everybody's talking about it.
My pick is going to be a talk from Charlie Cheever from Seattle JS, August 23rd, 2016. We'll link to it. It's basically talking about Expo and React Native. I think it's super interesting to hear someone like Charlie talk about this and give a presentation about it. He's a really smart guy, and he's very successful in his past, and he's done a lot of cool stuff. So kind of hearing about Exponent, from him also, it was just super interesting. And it's only like a 25-minute talk. So I'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. And he invented a lot of cool stuff at Facebook. And I think he's the co-founder of Quora. Okay, well, I guess that will go ahead and wrap up episode 62 of React Native Radio. Leland, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.